what comes in the way and how can they overcome it? Do I shadow a good mentor?
Yeah.
Do I journal? You know what I'm asking, Sam.
It's a really good question. I think it's here's what I think is a really, really helpful posture. I wished I had kind of this in my toolkit when I was in my 20s. Um, First and foremost, what I think you want to be doing, right, is tracking in each of your job experiences. Because let's be honest, a lot of it is random. A lot of the stuff that happens to you in your early career is someone offers you a job, it sounds good, you take it, you hope for the best, right? So, use that opportunity as a way to test for yourself, what do you really enjoy? Let me start. Let's do this rigorously. First question is what do you think you're really good at? What is emerging for you as something that you're better at than most people?
And even
Uh,
that's a discovery process, right?
it is a discovery process, yeah. And that what you're so what I was good at was not the stuff that I wanted to be good at. Let me put it that way, right? I sort of now that and there's room for building skills, so you got to leave it open. But I was sort of denying some intrinsic capabilities I had because I had a concept of what I should be doing,
Yeah.
right? And I think my first recommendation is be open to allowing stuff that you're naturally good at to emerge. Now, this is, um, I think, a really important aspect of self-discovery and self-learning, right? And so, just kind of your first job out of university or business school or whatever it is, graduate school, whatever it is, be open to what you're good at that may not be directly aligned to your degree.
Yeah.
I was an economist and I was a financial, I was economics and finance, right? And, here I am in organizational psychology, right? Like, how did that happen, right? But in organizational science. Well, it's sort of allowing for those things to emerge and recognize that that's not a denial of what I did. I mean, I did that for a lot of good reasons, and it gave me some great opportunities and allowed me to be a CEO, and it allowed me to do things in this world that and I loved and I do like it. I mean, I love that stuff. I just don't do it in my career, right? So it's kind of like just giving yourself a little bit think about it in terms of guardrails, not as a linear track. Nothing is linear in this world. Now, we do this little exercise called the River of Life, which I know you're familiar with executives and ask them to tell their story and think back about that through line that they discovered and what did unfolded for them over time. Anthony Burrow at Cornell University did talks about three sources of motivation, three sources of insight that give you a sense of individual purpose. Three sources. The first one is, sort of who inspired me. Who's, like, inspired me on my journey, kind of what did they teach me? So this question you're asking about mentorship is really relevant.
Yeah.
By the way, side note, sometimes if you're like me, you had in your early career people who inspired you in the negative, meaning they they I had a boss in consulting who, to this day, I think is what I'm about to do as a leader gonna sound like him? And if it is, I don't do it,
Yeah. Okay.
right? Because that's like the contra thou the counterfactual to what I actually want to be, right? So, allow yourself but also, you're inspired by lots of people in your life. They're from your life, they're not just from your work life, right? So who inspired you? The other source is, what were the inflection points in your life that really taught you something? Sort of maybe even caused you to bump up against your values. The twists and turns that were maybe unexpected. Things happen. And those things that happen in your life, sometimes they're very difficult, teach you something. Trauma even can teach you something, right? So we sort of allow that to be open to us to try to think about what our leadership purpose is or why we're here in our job, in the job we're in. And the third one is this idea of snowball effect. He calls it the snowball effect, but he describes it as stuff you always go back to. You know? Stuff that you kinda didn't allow to emerge as sort of an identity for you because it's a skill you had, but you didn't think it's a skill it's not a should, it's a you have it anyway. And a lot of stories I hear from leaders is of their ability to kind of recognize that they sort of suppressed certain things that they were good at just because they thought it wasn't something I should do. We're brought up with an image of, the age-old story of, my parents expect me to be a doctor, a lawyer, and an engineer, right? And so which is fine, by the way. I mean, I was gonna be a banker, but then allow for that to loosen up a bit and allow for other signals to emerge. So that it's first and foremost, what is kind of life teaching you and about you is kind of the first thing and what you're really good at. The second one is same story. What is life teaching you? What are you passionate about? What are you actually not willing to sacrifice? And here's where it's really critical. You've got to look at the overlap between what you're good at and what you're passionate about, right? So it's very easy early in your career to over rotate on one or the other. I did. It's very easy to say, "Oh, I'm really passionate about this, therefore I'm gonna go do a job about this." And the caution is, hang on, is that really a place where you're gonna be able to meaningfully contribute, right? You see the contribution comes up
Yeah.
again.
Mhm.
So you really wanna be able to find something you're gonna meaningfully contribute to, and that's gonna require you to look at the overlap between what you're passionate about and what you're good at, right? I am, passionate about acoustic guitar. But you are not gonna see me at the Hollywood Bowl, and it's not gonna be my career. It's a hobby, I love it, but it is outside of my purpose because I'm not that good at
Yeah.
it. I'm just not, right?
Well,
And
that's a good point. I'd really like to hear more. Please, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, so I'm just this overlap is a little takes now this is kind of answering in an oblique way your question about journaling. This is where I think journaling is really helpful. Draw a Venn diagram. What are all the stuff what are all the things that you're really good at? Draw another, draw 2 circles, overlapping. And in the other circle, what are you really passionate about and what sits in that little overlap space? That's where you gain some insight as to how you live your purpose in your job, or at least get close to it, or at least get to that small p purpose of contribution, meaningful contribution. There's other content but this is still just only part of the equation because all we've talked about in that one Venn diagram
Yeah.
is we've talked about the inside out view. We've talked about, okay, this is what I should be focused on, these kind of domains, these areas.
Mhm.
Um, uh, there's an outside in view that you have to put
Okay.
into the picture. And the outside in view is who cares? Like, who cares about that so let's just say I did the exercise and I said, "Look, my overlap is, look, I think I'm really good at client relationships. I think I'm really good at managing those. I really like doing that as well. That's a nice overlap.
Sure.
I really like organizational stuff. I'm pretty good at it, that kind of stuff. I'm pretty good at finance, but I'm not really passionate about it. So that sits outside of my purpose. And I kind of do that exercise, and you start to get these adjectives and these kind of nouns, and you don't get a job description in this exercise, by the way. You just get kind of a close to these qualities that you're after. Now, the next overlap, if I add a circle to these 2 circles and have it overlap the overlaps, and with some pieces outside of it, is what does the business actually need and want of me in the job that I'm in, right? Now, the business m might not have articulated that very clearly, but you kinda know what they need and want of you. And, I always ask leaders to talk, especially when I work with technology companies in Silicon Valley, which is just, an hour flight away from me. I spend a lot of time up there, right? And, what I find is that a lot of these mid-level leaders in technology companies are still struggling with what does the business need of them as a leader,
Yeah.
right? They know what the business needs of them technically, but when you ask yourself what the business needs of you, you've got to have this expanded view. And even if you're not yet a people leader, even if you're really early in your career, yes, you have technical capabilities, but you also have organizational, interpersonal skills that are being leveraged, whether you know it or not, that they expect you to leverage, right? Because it is now a much more collaborative environment than it was when I entered the workplace, and it's therefore, and we're seeing leadership is getting pushed down. In fact, one of my clients, I did an entire session on leadership for purely independent individual contributors, no people leaders. They're just individual contributors, and we talked about leadership for an entire day. And what I found was those conversations were not terribly different than people who have large organizations. Why? Because at any given point in time in this company, one of those people in the room is gonna be seen as the technical expert and having to lead the conversation or lead the decision-making process, right? So we're talking about here a really interesting, question, which is, what is the business really needing and wanting of me, and how does that intersect
Yeah.
with what I think I'm good at and passionate about? And that's way more powerful than a job description.
Yeah.
Now, I always say to leaders who have Gen Z or even millennial kind of folks reporting to them to say, if you ever get the question in a one-on-one, you get the following question. I need some clarity on my role, right? That presenting question is usually not the actual question that they're wanting to ask. What they're really asking, I find in most cases, is what's my purpose? How do I contribute differently? How do I actually adjust what I'm doing so that I'm more excited about it? And I think that most leaders today should lean into that, because if you don't have that conversation, you're going to end up with if you don't have the conversation, the employee will eventually leave and go on a quest, like we all do, right? So you're gonna lose talent if we don't sort of lean into this.
Yeah.
And I I kinda and the generational thing is real because, in the FT back, I think it was in 2014, Simon Collins, the UK chairman of KPMG, was quoted in, the Financial Times. He said, "To motivate my generation was easy. You just threw scraps of cash at us and kicked us. This generation," he was talking about millennials at that time, "this generation is looking for meaning in life, which candidly and shamefully, I don't think our generation was." Right? So, leaders who are my age and maybe even a little older, Gen X, maybe even later, older millennials, are now gonna be faced with having to have this be part of the conversation of employee engagement
Yeah.
and role description. It's not as simple as roles anymore. It's really about our contribution, and a lot of that is driven not just by the generational realities we were brought up in, and the fact that this, by the way, this trend has started, I think, even in the boomers. I think this started a long time ago, right? It's just become magnified, and it's also because the world's a very different place. And it's also because the complexity and ambiguity that we're facing in organizational life is so intense, we need anchors to get us kind of motivated to deal with all of this complexity. And the one thing we know about purpose is it provides an anchor. I when I get the chance to do a keynote address and I'm speaking to usually more than a couple of hundred people in a big room, I'm talking about individual purpose, I ask the following question of these leaders. I say, "Tell me, just think for a moment to yourself, what's the last thing you said no to?"
Yeah.
And and these are all very successful leaders, they contribute lots, they're doing great work, they have large organizations, and I get just the most blank, worried stares from the audience. Right? And then I did get one hand go up and say, "Well, I declined an expense report." Right? You know, I said, "Okay, if something you said no to that wasn't compliance or policy driven,"
Yeah.
right? And that's what I'm asking for is, where did you say no where it was a productive no? Meaning it was a no from values, it was a no from clarity of purpose, it was a no because you had an anchor in something and you said, "No, I can't take that on, I don't wanna take that on, it's just not me, I'm not the right person," or "I can't do it," or "I don't have time," or whatever it is, right? But some decision rule that helps you to be able to say no so that you can prioritize your work in a way that is actually your highest and best value to the organization. It takes a lot of courage to do that.
Yeah.
But secret ingredient of courage is clarity on what your superordinate goal is, right? What's the thing that's bigger than you that you're trying to serve? So I think this is totally worth the trip, but I also think that this is not a conversation that we should have in organizations in isolation or, I think journaling is great. I love it, but I think you also need to bring it into the workplace. I think you need to bring it into your conversations about your development.